Has your significant other ever told you that they were fine when you knew something was wrong, but you couldn't figure out what? Well, that's pretty much Yu-Gi-Oh! In a nutshell. One of the most popular card games in the entire world, also just so happens to be one of the most confusing. So confusing that even the most avid players in the game make mistakes, and the overall consensus for Yu-Gi-Oh! Players is that they just simply can't read. In today's video, I'm gonna take it up a notch, like when you don't feed your girlfriend after she told you nothing's wrong. I'm gonna be talking about 10 of the most confusing cards in a game that's already ridiculously confusing. Let's go ahead and jump on in. What's going on with ya, big dogs? And it is an amazing day for Yu-Gi-Oh! I hope that your day phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. Now, the top 10 most confusing Yu-Gi-Oh cards. You guys are gonna have to bear with me because I kind of went in every direction. For this video's criteria, not only did I gather cards that were confusing based on text, I also gathered cards that were confusing in certain situations. Cards that were complete chaos, whether it was in a tournament setting or just popular on the schoolyard playground. And of course, this is a part of my Yu-Gi-Oh! Top 10 series where we talk about the top 10s of everything Yu-Gi-Oh! Just a couple of weeks ago, I made a video talking about the top 10 powerful old school cards that are still being used in today. And I have an entire playlist of top 10s that you should look at. So of course, if you like these type of videos, go ahead and let me know down below in the comment section what should we do next. But without further ado, enough of my yapping, let's start talking about some really confusing Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. The first card I want to talk to you guys about is going to be a little bit interesting at first, but the deeper we get into the lore, the more confusing the card gets. Pyro Clock of Destiny made its debut in Pharaonic Guardian, and thank God that it doesn't have another print. While it does have a wording change, the original text is just so much more fun to read, and it's simply because you won't find this sequence of wording on any other card in the game. Pyro Clock says, move the turn count forward by 1 turn. The turn in which this card is activated continues as normal. Now, there were many schoolyard problems with this card, as players thought since the turn moved forward by 1, you get to repeat the same actions, like draw an additional card for your draw phase, or normal summon an additional time, all the way down to getting a second battle phase and attack it. But what this card is actually designed for is moving the turn count forward on card effects like Swords of Revealing Light. Instead of being under the card effect by 3 turns, you're under it by 2. But I would be a liar if I said the confusion of this card stops right there. You see, Pyro Clock of Destiny doesn't apply for everything evenly. Like, for example, card effects like Gold Sarcophagus, it wouldn't move the turn count forward an additional time. Other cards like Wave Motion Cannon won't get a counter. And even though you did advance to another turn, card effects that say they can only be activated once per turn cannot be activated again. Pyro Clock of Destiny works specifically for cards that count turns and nothing else. And while its errata says advance the turn count of one effect that counts turns by 1 turn is a little bit more clarifying, it's still a fairly confusing card because it doesn't apply to every card that counts turns. Pyro Clock can be a truly confusing trap card, but if you don't know math, specifically algebra 2, then Simultaneous Equation Cannon can be even more confusing. Simultaneous Equation Cannon is actually a really strong card. It's the big brother of Linear Equation Cannon, which could be a confusing card, but I decided not to include it because this one easily takes the cake. What Simultaneous Equation Cannon does is that you banish 1 fusion monster and 2 Exceed monsters with the same rank from your extra deck whose combined level and ranks equal to the total number of cards in both players' hands and on the field. Then after that, you can return 2 of your banished monsters. One of them has to be an Exceed, one of them has to be a fusion, whose combined level and rank equal the level or rank of 1 face-up monster on the field. Then you get to banish all cards they control. Simultaneous Equation Cannon is literally 2 equations in 1. It's actually how I taught myself Algebra 2, because I've never took the class. If you were confused just by reading the card, don't worry, I'll explain it to you. To make it easy, let's say for example, we have 10 cards between me and my opponent on the field and hand. And there's a level 6 monster on my opponent's side of the field. In order to resolve the effect of Simultaneous Equation Cannon, you would have to banish 2 Exceed monsters that are rank 2 and, oh, that's 8, damn it. To make this make sense, imagine there are 8 cards between you and your opponent controls a level 8 monster on the field. To make Simultaneous Equation Cannon work, you would have to banish 2 Exceed monsters with the rank of level 2 and a level 4 fusion monster. That equals to the total number of cards on the field and hand. Then because your opponent controls a level 6 monster, you would have to return a rank 2 monster and a level 4 fusion to banish all cards on their side of the field. Where true confusion comes in is where gameplay doesn't match the current situation all the time, and the amount of math you're going to have to do in every step when cards change on the field or hand. It is genuinely one of the most devilish but rewarding cards when you can resolve. The only problem is that it can be a complete mental nightmare no matter what. Kinda like how Small World was when it first came out. Now for a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players, Small World is very, very simple. But when this card came out, it actually blew players' minds. Small World was so complicated, there was actually a program made specifically for this card to help players understand how it worked. Because what Small World says is that you reveal one monster in your hand. Choose one monster from your deck that has exactly one of the same things, type, attribute, level, attack, and defense, and banish the revealed monster from your hand face down. Then, add one monster from your deck to your hand that has exactly one of the same things, type, attribute, level, attack, or defense, and banish that card. Even as I read this card out right now, it's so confusing, but it's better explained when you actually activate the card. Let's take, for example, I wanted to add Dark Magician from my deck to my hand, and I had Karibo in my hand. I would activate Small World to banish Karibo from my hand, then I will reveal the card that has one thing in common with Karibo and no other things. Chaos Emperor Dragon just so happens to be able to fit this criteria. From there, I would banish Chaos Emperor Dragon from my deck, and then I would add Dark Magician to my hand, which also only has one thing in common with Dark Magician, it being the Dark attribute. Now, this might be a lot simpler when it's explained to you that way, but reading it on the card is a complete disaster. It almost reminds me of reading Patrician of Darkness for the first time and having to argue with people on the school ground that it doesn't do anything what players says it does. And what this card originally said was, as long as this monster remains face up on the field, the controller of this card selects the targets of his or her opponent's attacks. This seems really, really simple. There's no way that on the playground this can get messed up. Well, unfortunately, it was only simple to players like us nowadays, because players would have Patrician of Darkness on the field and think that they could use their opponent's monsters to attack into their own cards. This was definitely one of the most frustrating cards to deal with if you played Yu-Gi-Oh back in the day, because during this boomer time, the internet wasn't really an accessible thing. So when you give a bunch of 6th graders who fail English class on a consistent basis long text that actually leaves things open-ended, there could be some problems down the line in the schoolyard. But not all confusion was on the kids' part. A lot of confusion was actually because of Konami themselves. Sometimes Konami would print a Yu-Gi-Oh card a certain way, only to redact back on that and completely change the effect. This happened way too many times in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, and is the biggest reason why Skull Lair makes this list. You see, Skull Lair's original text was interesting. It said, remove from play any number of cards in your graveyard, destroy one monster on the field whose level stars are equal to the number of cards you remove from play. Now, you new school Yu-Gi Zoomers are probably going to say, what is a level star and what is removed from play? And to put it in layman's terms, it means banish and just level. How this card originally worked is that you can banish as many cards as you wanted, monsters, spells, and traps to be able to destroy monsters. But where Konami caused a lot of confusion is that immediately they reprinted Skull Lair to say remove any number of monster cards in your graveyard from play to destroy a face-up monster on the field who's equal to the level stars. The reason why this card makes this list is because the big confusion during the time. Konami talked to us Yu-Gi boomers just as often as they talk to you guys in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Never. And with the internet being a waning thing and players had to rely on dial-up, it took a fairly long time for players to figure out that Skull Lair's wording was changed. On top of that, I also remember another type of confusion when it came to level stars, which is the reason why I pointed it out. Players thought that they can banish monsters in the graveyard with the same level as the level stars on the field. So instead of having to banish 4 monsters on the field, banishing a level 4 monster to destroy a level 4 monster on the field was a thing they tried to do on the playground. And the worst part is that that's not the only time Konami has changed a card effect and didn't let us know. An infamous card is Necrovalley. Necrovalley's wording has changed almost every single time it has been printed, and its functionality has changed along with it. Its original printing says as long as this card remains face up on the field, all effects of spell, trap, and monster effects that involve graveyards are negated, and neither player can remove cards from play. In addition, increase the attack and defense of all monsters that include gravekeepers in their name by 500 points. Dang, this card said 500 points. Crazy. I find it super fascinating to know that Necrovalley prevented anything that involved the graveyard. This version of Necrovalley gave a clear and concise thing that if the card effect evolved the graveyard, it's getting negated. But later on in the future, cards that moved themselves out of the graveyard were unaffected by Necrovalley. Later, Necrovalley's text was changed to negate any card that remove a card in the graveyard other than itself to any other place, meaning monster effects like Dark World that can special summon themselves from the graveyard would be able to activate. From there, another piece of Necrovalley was added to it, preventing players from changing types and attributes in the graveyard. Necrovalley has received 8 erratas, some changing completely how the card works, while others changing the wording of the card, making it less confusing, but unfortunately, at times it made it more confusing. Still to this day, I am thoroughly convinced that if we get another Necrovalley reprint, it will say a completely different thing. Probably somewhere amongst the lines that if your opponent summons from the graveyard, you win the game. Who knows at this point in time? Now, my top 3 Yu-Gi-Oh cards that are the most confusing, and I promise you, the cards that we talked about, they can vary from confusing to not really as confusing once you figured it out, but these are a whole different level. Mystical Ref Panel cracks my top 3 simply because there aren't many cards, if any cards, that are worded exactly like it. What Mystical Ref Panel says, activate only when a spell card that targets one player is activated. The effect of that spell card is applied to the other player instead. What's really weird about this card effect is never, in Yu-Gi-Oh's 10,000 plus cards, is there ever a card that actually specifically states target one player on the field. Maybe because there's no player on the field, but there's never a card that implies that a player is being targeted. This leads to all type of confusion on what Mystical Ref Panel can actually affect. Some players thought it could be used on cards like Monster Reborn, but unfortunately that's not true. You see, Mystical Ref Panel can only be used to these following effects: cards that increase or decrease a player's life points, allow a player to draw cards from their deck, cause players to discard cards from their hand, or modify actions a player can take, like Soul Exchange. But where this card gets a little tricky is the cards you can't use it to. For example, you can't use Mystical Ref Panel in response to a card like Upstart Goblin because it's affecting both players. And you also can't use it on any equipped, continuous, or filled spell cards no matter what they say. It's one of the most confusing cards simply because finding the list of cards that it actually could work against is pretty hard. And then with more cards coming out, you have to ask yourself, can Mystical Ref Panel be used to it? And sometimes the answer, as shockingly as it is, will be no. Next is a trap card that also hasn't been printed in quite some time, Last Turn. Now, Last Turn says where your life points are at 1,000 or less, you select one monster on your side of the field and send all other cards on the field and respective owners' hands to their graveyards. Your opponent must then also special summon one monster from their hand or deck in attack position and attack your selected monster. Any battle damage from that battle is treated as 0. The player whose monster remains alone on the field at the end phase of the turn wins the duel. Any other result is a draw. In my opinion, this is one of the most coolest cards in Yu-Gi-Oh because it completely warps how Yu-Gi-Oh is played. It turns a game within a game. But there are so many rulings with this card, it's actually crazy. In fact, when Yu-Gi-Oh started the Genesis format, this card was popular because it took judges 2 hours just to rule over this card in a Genesis final. The thing about it is that this card seems to break every law in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can't even use cards like Ash Blossom to stop it. It's been ruled that way. It is simply one of the most confusing cards in the game and will probably remain banned just for that reason. Inspector Porter is one of the most disgusting cards ever printed. Most people hate this card simply because it doesn't allow players to play Yu-Gi-Oh! The confusing thing about this card is that it says neither players can activate a monster effect unless the number of monster effects that the players have previously activated that turn is less than the number of card types on the field: Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, Exceed, Pendulum, and Link. Now, reading that card seems stupid confusing, and this can be argued as one of the most singular, confusing Yu-Gi-Oh cards of all time. I think what makes Yu-Gi-Oh so confusing is that these cards are worded terribly. When you look at other card games like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, they all have special words that can easily be referenced back to a particular rule book or a special subsection that teach you what these cards do and what they are. Yu-Gi-Oh simply doesn't have that outside of Banish and Piercing. But a lot of trees could have been saved, a lot of ink could have been kept had Konami started using those phrases, which ironically, I think they use on Rush Duels. Now for the number one most confusing thing in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's not necessarily a card, but I think everybody can agree. The most confusing thing in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Are if effects versus when effects. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh, most cards say if a card is activated, you can perform a certain action. This pretty much means that no matter what, even if these card effects have to activate in a separate chain, they will. They won't do something called mistiming. But back in the day when Yu-Gi-Oh was young and dumb, I mean, they still make some of these cards so they can still be considered young and dumb. There are cards that say when a card effect is activated, you can perform a particular action. Now here's where it gets confusing. I don't want you guys to confuse that when a card effect happens, perform a particular action. The huge difference is that the second card effect is mandatory. When something happens, you have to do something, and the other one is optional. When you can. And the easiest way to explain this to every single one of you guys is Elemental Hero Stratos. Stratos says when this card is summoned, you can add a hero monster from your deck to your hand. You see, the problem and the most confusing thing about that is that when a card says win and you can in its text, that win and you can needs to be the last thing to happen in order for you to activate its effect. What's even crazy is that this can happen on unrelated effects. Take for example, if my opponent used Monster Reborn to special summon their Dark Magician, and I activated Call of the Hunted in response to Monster Reborn to special summon Stratos to my side of the field. As you guys already know, with Yu-Gi-Oh! Chain Links, things resolve backwards. So the first thing that would happen would be me special summoning Elemental Hero Stratos. The last thing that would happen would be my opponent using Monster Reborn to special summon Dark Magician. And since the last thing that happened was Dark Magician being summoned and not Elemental Hero Stratos, I won't be able to activate the effect. Not only do you have to look for a card effect that says when you can versus if you can, you also have to decipher if it is the last thing to happen. New players, old players, all players alike easily get tricked over this effect over and over again. So don't worry if you fall for it yourself. But that is easily the top 10 most confusing cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Big dogs, I want you guys to let me know what are some other confusing cards. Also, if you really like this top 10 series, you already know what to do. Go ahead and let us know about some other top 10 videos you want to watch. And also be sure to check out these videos so I can catch you on the next one.